Welcome back. Apple is refusing to follow the FBI's orders to help hack the San Bernardino shooter's iPhone. The FBI worried about important clues about accomplices and additional plots that could be hidden on that phone, sparking a huge privacy battle this day. Correspondent Pierre Thomas has more.
A federal judge in California ordering Apple to help the FBI unlock an iPhone used by Saeed Farouk, who went on a murderous rampage with his wife, leaving 14 dead in San Bernardino.
We still have one of those killer's phones that we have not been able to open. And it's been over 2 months now. We're still working on it.
The ruling could be a key victory in the FBI's long-running battle with Apple and other tech companies over the government's ability to access encrypted data on smartphones and tablets. Apple vowing to appeal, saying it would put the privacy of hundreds of millions of customers at risk. The company telling us overnight the government is asking Apple to hack our own users. We fear that this demand would undermine the very freedoms and liberty our government is meant to protect. The FBI has been unable to get into the smartphone because it did not have Farouk's numerical code to open the device. The Bureau fears that 10 unsuccessful attempts to open the Apple phone would cause it to automatically erase key data and make the phone permanently inaccessible.
The battle is the traditional one between the security of society at the cost of individual privacy.
But that security feature a critical roadblock. The FBI has been unable to get inside the phone to look at texts or emails, which might help determine who Farouk and his wife Malik may have been communicating with to plan the attacks and where they might have traveled before the massacre. Investigators are desperate to find out what happened in an 18-minute gap between the attack and the couple's deadly encounter with law enforcement. The couple allegedly swore allegiance to the leader of ISIS, and the FBI wants to know the extent of ISIS involvement, if any.
The FBI says that phone may hold the critical answers, but the security feature on that iPhone is precisely what customers want if their phone is stolen or lost. So it's privacy versus security in a legal fight that could go all the way to the Supreme Court. Pierre Thomas, ABC News, Washington.
Thank you, Pierre Thomas. And joining us now, David Pereira. He's a cybersecurity reporter for Politico Pro. David, it is great having you with us today. This is a very interesting topic that affects all of us because we're all tied into our devices, we're all invested in them, and we're all frankly rooting for law enforcement to learn everything they can about what happened in California and plots that may be in the creation stage but haven't deployed yet. So this is classic, this privacy versus security debate.
It is. It's not clear exactly what it is that the FBI wants off of that phone. It's also not clear whether or not they've been able to see some of the data or some of the information they're seeking through other means. For example, through the iCloud backup system that Apple has, through information about who's been calling who on that iPhone. You wouldn't necessarily need to get inside the phone in order to get that information, but there's probably information that, who knows what's on that phone.
In other words, if I hear you right, you're saying that there are electronic footprints outside the phone in terms of the various communication networks that our phones utilize that would provide the same information as if you go boop, 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 and you're in.
Same information, not necessarily. That's the big unknown. What's exactly on that phone? But the FBI is able to get some information already.
This sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, this isn't a situation where Apple is hiding the key and the FBI is saying, please turn over the key so we can get into this dude's phone. Apple is saying we would have to create a key to fulfill your request, and we choose not to do that for a host of reasons that are very core to our corporate philosophy and practice.
Apple has made it a point. It's a market differentiator for Apple, and that is they want people to use iPhones, trust in iPhones, and in order for that to happen, they say iPhones have to be private. What you said about the keys is more or less correct. There is an embedded key on the chip that Apple says it doesn't have a record of. And in order to decrypt that phone, the encryption key is a combination of that embedded encryption key and the user passcode, which is why the FBI is unable to simply waltz in or even have Apple, supply the key, assuming they had it, and just unlock the phone. It depends on that pin.
How much is Apple worried about precedent? This might sound to a lot of people like the sort of case where it's a slam dunk, whatever information the authorities can glean, all the better for all of society. But the next case, or the 100th case in the pipeline, might not be so clear-cut, to the point where people are saying, well, hold on, this is now one where the scales, where the teeter-totter tip in terms of privacy. Is that part of the equation?
Sure. Apple's very worried about the slippery slope. In fact, actually, it's already been fighting a not quite similar request, but another case in Brooklyn federal court. Since October, there was an iPhone that's owned by a defendant involved in a meth distribution conspiracy. And prosecutors there have been asking Apple to unlock the phone, and since October, Apple's been saying no. So it's even before today, or before the court order that came last evening, Apple was fighting very hard not to establish a precedent.
This is your beat. This is something you're following closely. What will you be watching for? How is this battle between Apple and the feds likely to proceed? Pierre Thomas mentioned in the setup a potential Supreme Court showdown. Tell us what you, from your perch, are going to be watching for.
Absolutely. I don't doubt that Apple would be willing to pursue it all the way to the Supreme Court, all the way up through the Ninth Circuit, which is the Federal Court of Appeals for where California is, and then from there to the Supreme Court. So it could take years for this case to play out.
Do different devices have different protocols? In other words, is this a situation where if the accused shooter in the San Bernardino case hadn't been using an Apple, if he'd been using the device manufactured by some other company, we would be talking about a different set of, much the same in terms of the macro debate on privacy versus security, but would some of the particulars be significantly different?
Absolutely. In fact, actually, it'd be even different if he was using a different model of iPhone. The iPhone that he's using is a 5C model, which is 3 years old at this point, and it lacks some of the more modern security protections that Apple's put in, starting in, I believe, the 5F, definitely with the iPhone 6. And that's a separate chip inside the iPhone called a secure enclave that would make it nearly impossible for Apple to do what the FBI is asking to do with the 5C model. So it is worth pointing out that even if the FBI somehow gets their way on this, it's a question about how much it'll apply in the future as these older models get weeded out of the market.
We have 30 seconds left. The setup piece mentioned that they fear that 10 false passcode attempts wipes the phone clean. You wonder if they've thought about using 7 or 8 of those attempts using the most common passwords, just to see if they get lucky.
No, I wouldn't do that if I was in the FBI's shoes.
Doesn't sound like a wise strategy to you.
No.
Politico Pro cybersecurity reporter David Pereira, thank you very much for stopping by.
My pleasure.
Interesting case, to be sure. We'll step aside here. We are back, though, with more News Talk on News Channel 8 right after this.